I mean, you wouldn't think Tanzania and Egypt would be really prone in terms of those LLM sort of areas, or it would be a great fascination point. It's amazing to see how startups and, are just sort of taking the lead. They're just saying, I have access to this technology, I can build it.
How's it, Exponential Africa? Throughout history, nations have competed for land, resources, infrastructure, and energy. And today, a new race is underway, a race for intelligence. Artificial intelligence is rapidly becoming the most important technology of our time, shaping economies, industries, governments, and societies. But as powerful AI systems become embedded into everything we do, a critical question emerges. Who actually owns the intelligence? Who owns the data? Who builds the infrastructure? And who ultimately benefits from the value that AI creates? For Africa, these questions are especially important. And will we simply consume AI built elsewhere? Or can we become creators, owners, and leaders in the next intelligence revolution? To unpack this, I'm joined by Lavina Ramkissoon, one of Africa's leading voices on AI governance, responsible AI, and digital transformation, working closely with initiatives shaping the future of AI across the continent. Lavina, welcome to Exponential Africa.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I mean, we've been discussing AI for pretty much this whole year on Exponential Africa. It's just this, it's become such an important technology. And I think sovereignty is on the top of that list of what we need to work out and discuss when embracing artificial intelligence. So Lavina, let's start with some of the basics. What do we actually mean when we talk about AI sovereignty, in your opinion?
I particularly love this question because it sets the tone in terms of the entire conversation that we're going to delve into today. So in my opinion, AI sovereignty is basically where we have the ability of society or us as a collective species, as humanity, that helps to shape how intelligence is created, right? How it is then governed, how it is then applied to our day-to-day lives. And obviously all of this has to function within certain sort of parameters. And those are really what we call, things like our values, our interests, our aspirations, our morals. So there's got to be some framing, and I think that's what the values, the morals, the interests, and the aspirations kind of does. But when we're talking about sovereignty, it's not simply about just owning technology and having complete reign over where it's stored, or how it's built, or who has access to it, right? It is also about maintaining agency. And maintaining agency, whether it's human agency or AI agency, in this era of intelligence, really now becomes the foundational layer of infrastructure, or for almost like it's the wheels that we have created to start, this acceleration. One of the sort of deeper questions that I keep sort of coming to is, and you alluded to this, is, who decides how AI gets influenced in our economies, in our cultures, in our institutes, in our day-to-day lives, right? And ultimately, it is always back down to how do we preserve the human and collective sort of way and just being, right, that is needed. So preservation on one hand becomes important in sovereignty, but also safety is the other for the AI on the other side of it. So hopefully that just gives a bit of a breakdown in terms of where we're at.
Absolutely, I think it's so important for governments to realize how important this is for our own sovereignty. We need to invest in our own local infrastructure, and we need economic participation across the continent, so we can have our own technological independence, which I think is hugely important. And this is becoming a major issue globally. Why is it that AI sovereignty is becoming such an important issue globally, in your opinion?
So we've had a lot of changes that's come about in the last, 3 years from a technology perspective. But from a human perspective, the way we've been responding to these changes, I think, has been the real trigger as to why it's becoming really, of concern or of importance. So, AI has become the source of economic power. It's become the source of geopolitical influence, right? But equally so, it's also become the source of cultural reshaping that's happening at this point in time. And all of them are profound in its own right as a standalone topic, right? However, it is also, when we put all three of these aspects together, it becomes almost a oh wow moment. Oh, I should reflect and rethink moment. Is this who we really are? And is this the sort of outcome that we want? And in this AI narrative, we always know that, there's two sides to it. Those guys who are the doom and gloom, and those that are of the abundance, right? And again, it's not AI that will help determine where we end up. It is us as humanity that will determine where we end up and to the degree of adoption that we have. So if we look at, historical sort of data and information, when we look at the previous eras, land was obviously a huge issue. Then energy became a huge issue. Then industrialization became, or industrial capacity became a huge issue. And each one of them, redefined how we behaved as humanity, and how we were either brought together or how we then modified ourselves to adapt. Yeah. And therefore, I think, at this point in time, uh, we're becoming, or we have a risk of becoming just the consumers of these decisions that are made by AI. We're becoming, the consumers of the values that AI creates. We're becoming the consumers of the economic systems that AI is now redesigning for us, right? Let's just take a simple example of our, whether it be, a Spotify or, your Google Maps, or, name a countless of them. And, they have entrusted, or we have entrusted ourselves as humans into these software systems to the points that they've redefined maybe our likes in music, or it redefines routes all the time in terms of where we need to get to from, A to B. And that trust layer that we've now crossed over in terms of implicit trust, to systems or to AI now, really becomes quite, foundational again in terms of how adaptive we become, or how progressive or how reactive we are. So, in terms of why it's important, it's fundamentally important because it's redefining who we are as a species.
Yeah, I love that. I think the whole idea of that, if you compare it to, those big sort of global use cases of land ownership, as an example, when you owned the land, you could decide where the lines of the land started and ended. And
Yeah.
apparently, in the old days, they would just draw these lines on the maps, and they would decide this is this land and that's that country, and that's how it got divided up, and that's created ownership over those things. And so it's almost like the same thing now, as who owns the models, who owns the data, who owns the infrastructure, to see who's going to own those properties and be able to thrive and get economic benefit out of them. So it's really at a fundamental level, it's monumental how important this is for independence as a nation, or as a country or a continent. So the one thing people say is that it might mean isolation. It might divide us, like you were also saying. It might create those divisions. Does AI sovereignty mean isolation to you?
Um, not the way that I see it, or I think again we have the opportunity of how we design it, right? Becomes really key and important. So I'm sure you're familiar with the network state effect, and in that it is about how we get into smaller groups and how we realign ourselves to similar thinkings, how we become completely independent away from the sort of mass scenarios, either of a democracy or, governments providing certain services, or even, certain infrastructures. And we're moving completely away from all of that. And you would see it now by, the rise in social unrest that's been happening. You would see it in terms of the rise of, move away from democracy, because the trust again in politics has really changed. So sovereignty is not isolation. I think it's the way we interpret sovereignty that is either isolation or it's the abundant state, right? And again, from a collective Africa-wide perspective, it becomes important for us to collectively come together and truly function as a continent and have the ability to, have those common laws, have the ability to have, a very bold vision and a direction that is needed. Equally so, we require even just a simple thing of starting off with a definition of AI that becomes really key, because it then helps us to understand how we would then implement it within ourselves as a continent. So AI is definitely, when we talk about sovereignty, not isolation in my books.
I mean, this technology is so important that also what you touched on is this whole idea of cultural preservation. The AI has the ability to rewrite history. And if you think about it, even in the days of the people who owned the land or who won the wars could also tell the history of that time. So, what we have to be careful of is that this technology is so powerful, it could rewrite cultures, or it could, inject something new into a culture, and as if it has been like that all this time. And, with enough sort of convincing and enough, material, it becomes the reality of the future. So I think there's this whole idea of truth, and cultural preservation is also something really, really important to take note of. I mean, even the way narratives are being told in Hollywood are changing. It's very hard to know the origin and the original truth, because you've got this amazing technology that can rewrite truth.
When we talk about culture, for us in Africa, there's something that I often speak about, which is the dignity aspect, or the digital dignity aspect. And I don't think we recognize how impactful it already has been in terms of the technology and the separation from, those that can afford access to the technology versus those that can't. And we're already starting to see the net effect on ground in Africa. And, the future distribution of that power that then, will define us, within the context of Africa. So let's take, for example, when we talk about dignity, is it okay enough for, a big tech company to come in, to have content creators or content moderators, watch videos that are completely not okay to be seen, or to be treated as if they are already an AI themselves, where it's 24/7 viewing, or 7 or 8 hours viewing of, videos, to determine whether or not this narrative is actually okay or not okay, whether or not it helps to satisfy some of their companies' sort of mandates. And we've seen this sort of thing transpire on our continent, not once, not twice, but now 4 times over. And there's that aspect of, don't take advantage of who we are just because you can get things cheaper, better, and faster in the continent. But it is now more leaning towards that human element. So, everyone is going to be affected in the same ways. Our circumstances may just be different. So, we can utilize AI to have a better economic output, or help Africa to triple its GDP, which in reality is a very simple sort of viewpoint. But, again, it's where we want to start and stop this dignity narrative that becomes important.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important factor for us to play in the space. And I know you are ambassador for the African Union for AI. What are you seeing in terms of investment into AI in Africa? And where is Africa in this global AI race at the moment? At the moment it's really China and America, but where's Africa?
Yeah, so we've been playing quite a large role since 2018 from an AU perspective. We've obviously had a continental strategy put in way back when we had Mauritius and a few other countries, in 2018, go ahead and adopt some form of strategy and policy. I think in the last 18 months, we've seen us go from, maybe 3 or 4 countries having a specific AI policy, strategy, or regulation to now at least having about 20 of them. So we've seen rapid sort of adoption from a policy strategy perspective. When we look at the investment side of things, we've also seen equally a large sort of stream of investments coming in, either to, help build out infrastructure to support the wider global narrative, or it's been in terms of the resources or the raw materials that Africa can still, deliver in terms of this technological, demand that is there, whether it be from chips or, any other sort of facet within that sort of narrative. And lastly, just from governments, and the way that they're seeing it and approaching it is they become super aggressive, right, in terms of wanting to be either the first off the mark, or wanting to be that compute powerhouse, or even wanting to just lead the conversation in terms of how exactly we're going to end up governing all of this. We've seen, obviously, a large push in terms of data centers across the continent. We've seen AI factories sort of coming about. We've also starting to see, this agentic economy starting to boom within our own narratives as well. So I think, there is no sector that has not being touched on the continent by it, whether we're talking about healthcare, financial, space, all of it included, I think has just been quite a whirlwind. But the one thing that still is required is the orchestration of all of this together and collectively for us as a continent.
Totally agree. And that's really exciting to hear all of those developments that are happening. We heard David Roberts speak at our Singularity media launch the other day about, Africa can just leapfrog because we can be AI first, we can be AI native, because we don't all have all of these legacy systems and this legacy infrastructure. Just like we leapfrog the telephone lines and went straight to mobile, so we could leapfrog old computer infrastructure and go straight to AI infrastructure. So I think there's a massive opportunity for us in Africa really to dive headfirst into this, and either building the applications or, those AI factories is a massive, massive opportunity.
Yeah, and I think we don't understand that AI stack completely enough yet. So, there's semi-understandings of what is actually required within this AI stack, right? And obviously computation is one part, but energy plays another huge part. Data centers plays its own right in terms of, hosting this digital infrastructure and bringing it all together. But so at the same time does the applications of AI, which we're seeing starting to take, quite a larger sort of portion to the conversation, where it's actually now delivering that end value that is required and is delivering the sort of return of investment on AI itself.
And governments, I mean, what role should governments play, in this whole AI development?
Yeah, that's a interesting question. So again, I think policy strategy and putting in some frameworks is great. Um, However, I think when it comes to the regulation portion of it, there's got to be a very, very fine balance between private sector and the innovation that's actually happening, together with what governments should have, as well as some form of a social component. So people that are the guardians of humanity as such, that and between all of them, they kind of have this role of defining exactly where we end up, or how we bring all of this together. I don't think governments alone should regulate, because that would lead to us perhaps being very biased or one way or the other. But at the end of the day, I guess the flip side for governments, or the incentive, is that governments will improve, which means efficiency goes up. And as we know, every government can do with better efficiency.
Exactly, eh? Every government needs a Doge.
Yes, 100%. Let's start our own in Africa, or even in South Africa.
Yeah, this SA Doge.
There you go.
Yeah. Um, and I think like there's so much going on in the continent. I think another big factor is that we need to collaborate between African nations. I don't know how much is going on in terms of cross-border collaboration in AR. Are you seeing any government states playing together, or large companies across the continent sharing ideas or sharing infrastructure?
Yeah. So definitely has been happening over the last few years already. We've, from an AU perspective, sort of positioned ourselves to engage different member states together for this cross-border knowledge transfer, or even just in terms of technological transfer, or even just information transfer. You would know, or be familiar with the concept of the AfCFTA, which is the African Free Trade Continental Agreement, and one portion of that agreement is around cross-border information. Besides, cross-border payments and cross-border services, and cross-border data that's required. So, there is a large drive that is happening. The type of things that we've seen work thus far is, we've had cases where, let's take Nigeria and Uganda, one on the east and one on the west, and they've come together in terms of exchange. Let's take Uganda has had, an EV sort of environment, well up and running. They've converted all of their public transport systems into EVs about 4 or 5 years ago. They have an EV manufacturing plant, and now they went ahead. We brought them into Nigeria, where they can now offer those services in terms of building out the capacity for EVs, for Nigeria itself. And this happened at least about 2 or 3 years ago. Another instance is, with South Africa and Ghana, where we've had quite a good exchange, from a data center build perspective, as well as the knowledge transfer that we were, going into. We also have South Africa in terms of science discovery, with Uganda, both being very cutting edge on the science end front, and we've brought those two entities together to look at not just the sovereignty aspect of it, but more the hardware aspects of AI, and how can we actually start building out that capacity line that is actually required. So, I think another huge area that we're seeing cross collaboration is in healthcare. So, between like Malawi and, a few other sort of countries that have come together in terms of having to solve particularly for that. And as you know, at the moment, we have, a resurgence of the Ebola virus that has come about, both in DRC as well as in Uganda. And, the African CDC, which is a sort of crucial, convening power within the AU narrative around this. they are definitely, taking reign and using technology in this manner to help eradicate, Ebola at large. So, there's many different moving parts. We even have, I guess, from a university perspective, right, that knowledge exchange that's happening as well. So yeah, loads of fun things that are actually going on our continent.
That's amazing. That's great to hear. And, I think it's super enlightening. I mean, have you heard anything about any large language models or frontier models coming out of any of the African nations like Nigeria or Uganda?
Yes, 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 yes. So Tanzania has some interesting LLM models that they were working on, I think, for the last maybe 5-6 years. We've obviously seen within South Africa, large language models coming out. I think we've got 2 or 3 really good companies from Nigeria as well, from Egypt. We've seen equally. So yeah, very interesting. I mean, you wouldn't think Tanzania and Egypt would be really prone in terms of those LLM sort of areas, or it would be a great fascination point. But it's amazing to see how startups and are just sort of taking the lead when it comes to these things, and they're not defining themselves geographically anymore. They're just saying, I have access to this technology, I can build it. It is completely borderless, and it can help at the end of the day. So why not help rebuild our continent using tech?
Totally agree and love that. I mean, it's so nice to hear about some local AI champions out there. Make sure we have that global competitiveness, and we can, transform our education system, create jobs, and build economic growth. I think just to close out, let's do a quick lightning fire round. I'm gonna ask you a couple of quick questions, and
Okay,
just
let's do it.
some short, quick answers. So, Lavina, tell me, one AI opportunity that Africa must not miss.
Ooh, AI contributing to our economic output.
And one thing policymakers are underestimating.
Underestimating the human factor. So I think with that, what I mean is, we always think of ourselves as the better beings when we design these policies. However, when we implement them, we know that the true nature of humans come out, right? And I think that's the part that's always underestimated and undervalued when we define that.
And one thing that business leaders are underestimating.
The rapidness as to when ASI would actually be upon us.
And open source AI or closed AI.
Oh, do I have to choose one or the other? I think they both have their places. Yeah, at the moment, this is a tough question for me. I'd say where we are, maturity-wise, it's still closed. Open definitely has its place. However, people can go in and change how things are ruled and governed in an instant and reshape where we end up. Obviously, in the context of Africa, open AI or sort of open source AI is going to play a very large role in terms of unlocking a lot of our potential. But again, how and what those guardrails look like and how it gets shaped by a few individuals is still at risk at this point.
I think that's a great point. Is that even though they're open source, if the people who are creating the open source could change the weights and could change the design of that open source model, so that eventually you might have to use a certain chip that goes with that open source model to get it to run correctly. So is it really open source?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's the most important investment Africa should make today?
Most important investment is in coordination. So one thing that we can do for ourselves is better coordinate a lot of these different initiatives, a lot of these different technologies, and a lot of the different investments that are coming in. So for us to truly be able to understand how to leapfrog, or to understand what our true potential is as a continent, we need to collectively come together. But that does mean a large amount of coordination that is actually required to win in terms of, not being left behind or leaving no man behind.
Beautiful. Let's collaborate, not compete, and coordinate. And will Africa produce a global AI giant within the next decade?
I truly believe so. I'm working on it. So are you.
You've watched this space. It's coming soon.
There you go.
And so there you have it. It's clear that AI sovereignty is more than technology. It's about agency. It's about ownership. And it's about ensuring that Africa doesn't simply participate in the AI revolution as a consumer, but helps shape it as a creator. And the decisions we make over the next few years around data, infrastructure, education, governance, and innovation will determine whether Africa captures the value created by AI or watches it from somewhere else. So as I said, AI is just not a conversation. It's an economic conversation, a societal conversation, and one of the most important strategic conversations Africa will have this decade. Lavina, thank you so much for joining us. And to everyone watching, the future of intelligence is being built today. The question is, will Africa help build it? So let's keep building Exponential Africa. Thanks so much, Lavina. Catch you on the next one.
Thank you. Take care.